If you have the OET exam coming up soon, then you've come to the right place, because today we're going to talk about the top 5 mistakes that candidates make in the OET speaking paper. Hello and welcome to OET with Alex. In today's lesson we're going to look at 5 common mistakes that people make in the speaking part of the exam. You don't want to be like everybody else and to make these mistakes, so make sure you watch until the end so you can maximize the score that you will get in the speaking exam. Now, before we start looking at these mistakes, remember that I run an online OET preparation course with Atlantic Language. It's a great course. It takes 2 weeks. It should lead you right up to the date when you're taking the exam. We focus on tips, strategies, techniques that will make sure you get the best score you can possibly get when it comes to taking the exam. So check it out. All of the details are in the description as well. Okay, so the first mistake that people make in the OET speaking exam is not using your time to prepare well. So here I'm obviously thinking about the 3 minutes that you have before you start speaking in one of the role plays. In both of the role plays you have 3 minutes, which is quite a long time to look through that information. Now here I'm going to give you a tip of something that people don't do enough of, okay? So I'm going to pull up an example speaking role card and we're going to look at what we can do in that 3 minutes to really maximize our score and maximize how well we do in this role play. Okay, so if I could just talk you through how you can use your time to prepare for this. You've got 3 minutes. Here we've got a sample test from OET's website. It's related to pharmacy, but it really doesn't matter which one because we're not going to talk too much about the details in here or about the role play, the card or anything like that. What we're going to focus on are these words here at the start of each bullet point. Okay, so obviously in the 3 minutes you have to read through this, get an understanding of the situation, what the issue is with the patient or whoever it is in this conversation, but we have plenty of time to do that. So quite often people will just read it once, then they'll read it again to make sure they're familiar with everything in the test, but there's more we can be doing here, okay? And it involves using these words here. So these words are key. They tell you the function of what that you have to do in this speaking part, in this role play here, okay? So these words here, explain, convince, find out, explain again, advise. These are the words which tell us what we're supposed to be doing, and they tell us what language we have to use as well, okay? So if we see explain, obviously this means we have to give an explanation, but we can start thinking about how we could do that. So we could use an expression like, if I could just talk you through why your blocked nose may not be getting any better. So we've got this, the start of this sentence here. If I could just talk you through, I'm explaining. So we're using some functional language based on the word that is here. That's going to help with the linguistic criteria, but it's also going to help with the clinical communication criteria because you're signposting what is happening in the conversation and you're taking control of the conversation like we've already spoken about. So this is a great thing. So you see explain, you can think of an expression like, if I could just talk you through, if I could just talk you through this. Okay, I'm explaining to you now and I'm telling you with this phrase that I'm about to explain to you. We also have convince. So when you convince somebody, you're giving them your opinion. So you could say, in my opinion, the nasal spray is not the best option as far as I'm concerned. Things like this, other ways of convincing people. But the fact that we have this word here, convince, shows us what we have to do, and it gives us ideas of the type of language that we can use in this part of the exam. Find out, obviously find out means I have to ask some questions. Okay, so we're going to talk about questions later in this lesson as well. But one thing I'll say is You could use your time here, making sure that your questions are grammatically correct, because that is a big issue. We've got to explain the advantages. So you'd say, I'd like to tell you about the advantages. So there, it only takes a minute, not even a minute, a couple of seconds to think of this structure, and already, we're starting to build up things that are going to be useful in the conversation. And then at the end, we have advise. So, you could say advise the patient to return if problem persists. So we could say, I'd recommend that you return if the problem persists. So, we've got different ways of giving advice. If I were you, something like that we could use as well. So, looking at these words here and looking at the words which typically come up in these role cards, we can really do ourselves a big favor, not make the mistake of not preparing well, not using our 3 minutes, and it's really going to help us when we come to performing the role play in the speaking part of the OET exam. Now, the second mistake that people make when it comes to the speaking part of the exam is they let the examiner lead. Now, this is a big mistake that people make. I understand why people do it, because you're in an exam situation, you've got a person of authority, the examiner, sitting in front of you, and you feel like you're responding to him as it would be in a normal exam. But you have to remember that in this case, you are the healthcare professional. You have to take the lead. If this was the real situation when you were in your professional role, you would take the lead, you would lead it. I think, to start with, you need to find out the information about the situation, the patient, or whoever this other person is. But then after that, you really have to structure the conversation, and you have to take control. So you can feel free to interrupt, to ask questions, and lead the conversation the way that you want it to go, and the way that you would normally lead it in real life. So make sure the examiner doesn't take control, or there are awkward pauses while the examiner's waiting for you to do something. Take control, act like it's a real life situation, which you've done hundreds, thousands, millions of times before in your professional career, and take control. Okay, and the third mistake that people make in the speaking paper of the OET exam is not listening to the patient, or whoever this other person in the role play is, depending on the situation. So people get too stuck with the bullet points, I think. So, you get one bullet point ticked off, you think, I've done that, now I need to go on to the next stage. But remember, the examiner has their own role card as well, which, they might throw in some things, so you really have to, although you do have to work your way through the bullet points and make sure you cover everything, you also have to respond to what the person sitting in front of you is saying. So, you can't just switch off when they're talking and think, what's my next bullet point? What is it I have to do? You have to respond to what the actual person is saying. And this is a big mistake that people make. They focus too much on what they're doing. And remember, this is an interaction, it's a communication, and that's key to not making this mistake. Okay, so the fourth mistake that people make in the speaking part of the OET exam is not building rapport. So, check the clinical communication criteria. This is an important part of the exam as well. It's not just about the language that you use, it's about how you interact with this person, and building rapport is something you need to do. You need to show understanding to the patient, to their situation. You need to build that good relationship that you would normally do in a professional environment. You need to show empathy to their situation. Too often people in the exam, they're sitting listening to the patient, the examiner, whatever the role play is, and they're passive, they're like a stone, not giving anything away. You need to show that you're actively listening to the person, and you need to react to what they're saying as well. If they're telling you something which is terrible, even though it's only a role play, you have to react to that. So you have to show them that you have empathy towards their situation, that you understand where they're coming from, and that you're going to help them as well. The clinical communication criteria, if we look at them, I'll put a link
in the description below, but it gives you a lot of good tips about things that you should be doing, like building empathy and active listening and things like that. So check it out, and it can give you some ideas about how you actually have to behave in the exam itself. Okay, and the final mistake that we're going to look at today in the speaking part of the OET exam is this: making mistakes with questions. Here I mean question formation. We're talking about grammar here. You know, in this situation, in the role plays, you're going to have to ask the other person, the patient, the parent, whoever it is, you're going to have to ask them questions. And so often candidates make mistakes with questions. They say things like, how long you have this problem, instead of how long have you had this problem. So my advice to you is go and do some grammar exercises. If you think you're making mistakes with questions, which you probably are, a lot of people do, and especially when you're in a situation when you're trying to be communicative and grammar goes out the window, but you know you're going to have to ask questions. So make sure that you are on point with your question formation. There's lots of exercises out there that you can do, lots of things you can read about making questions in different tenses. Make sure the questions that you're asking are grammatically correct, because it's one of these things that people always make mistakes with. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Please remember to like and subscribe if you did. Check out my other channel as well, Learn English with Alex, which has general English lessons, and there are things there on making questions as well, which could be useful for the exam, and lots of other things which could be useful for OET preparation as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.